Hey, you. My name is Jer. My pronouns are they and them. I am currently in Mexico City. And in this video, I want to talk about two Buddhist recovery programs, Refuge Recovery and Recovery Dharma. What happened? This is a common question I get a lot as a person who runs Recovery Dharma meetings each week. I run two meetings. I've been with the program since the start, and I was also in this other program, Refuge Recovery. I was heavily involved in both, and I was involved in the situation that resulted in there being two programs instead of just one. And I want to answer that question in this video in a wholesome way for the people who are confused about it, who want to know more. And it's hard to find that information. So I'm going to start with a short version. Then I'm going to give some disclaimers. So if you're thinking of suing me, please wait for the disclaimers. And then I'm going to go into some detail about some different stuff about it. My hope is that this is a educational, thoughtful video. I'll do my best. I want this to be for people in recovery. This is not for people looking for a scandal, although there's a scandal in it, and that's why it exists. This isn't a mystery podcast. So I'm going to spoil it right at this front. And I just want people to understand their programs and pick the program that works for them. So, what is the short answer of what happened? And the answer is there was this program called Refuge Recovery created by this man called Noah Levine. And there was a big scandal about Noah Levine. He wrote the book, he owned the copyright. And in the end, the people who didn't want to be part of a program run by Noah Levine, mostly because of the scandal, but also how he handled it, created a new one. And there was a whole legal agreement. And so they created Recovery Dharma. They wrote a new book without copyright. It's Creative Commons, free to use, free to modify. And so Noah Levine continued doing Refuge Recovery, and the other people did Recovery Dharma. And so now there's two programs, and they're almost exactly the same. They're both. It's really a rewriting of the original program in different words because it's Buddhism. No one can own the program. It's the Eightfold Path. It's the Four Noble Truths. It's the basics of Buddhism applied along with some modern psychology. In both cases, a little bit of borrowing from the 12 steps and a little bit of throwing some 12-step stuff away. But they're more or less the same program. I'll go over a little bit more the specific differences maybe near the end, but it's not as important as the meetings are almost exactly the same. Hundreds of meetings that were Refuge Recovery switched to Recovery Dharma, and that includes all my meetings that I participate in. And so really there's a real continuity. Like, it's the same. I am both. I was very involved. I don't know if you could see, these books are heavily marked up. I spent lots of time. This book saved my life, Refuge Recovery by Noah Levine. I said that a lot of times, and it's still true. I found recovery because this was available. Buddhist teachings applied to addiction and for a modern audience. And this one was nice. It's written for like a punk rock audience that kind of speaks to me as a person. And yet it's fine. It completely works in Recovery Dharma and without some of the baggage. And that's how I see it. So that's the short version. What's the long version? The long version is, this is just my opinion. Anything in this video is only Jer's thoughts, Jer's experiences, things Jer went through. I was there for a lot of it. I was an instigator in this whole thing. So just please consider me biased. I am biased as heck. I worked on this book. I promote this book. I've bought many, many copies to give to people. So this is a video for Recovery Dharma people more than anything. This is for people in Recovery Dharma to understand what happened. If you're in Refuge Recovery and this helps you understand what happened and why there's another program and why you might, that's up to you, what you take away from this. What I want is to answer the question for Recovery Dharma people. Okay, I don't represent Recovery Dharma. Despite being an instigator, despite being involved in all of this, I have never been on the board. I have been actually ejected in different ways over the years. Because I'm a bit of an instigator. I talk about things people don't want to talk about, this video being a perfect example. There's a lack of history of Recovery Dharma because there's a real caution about talking about it because it's so divisive. I really hope, please don't get in fights in the comments on this video or share it and get in fights. This is not a thing to get in fights about. This is a thing to understand, right? And I like the truth. And anyway, I want the history to be out there in a convenient and accessible format for people. That's why I'm making this pretty long video. If you keep watching it, I imagine, look down and you tell me if it's long. So yeah, I don't represent Recovery Dharma. This is not official. This is just my experiences. I'm going to link to some journalistic articles from Jezebel and LA Mag where people have gone on the record and they did their research. You know, my research is one, I reread all those articles in preparation for this to make sure I knew what was officially in the record. And also my experiences, right? And I think there's a lot of stuff that's not in those articles that's relevant for people in Recovery Dharma, because it's part of our program. It's part of our program's history. And I think a good history of our program is valuable because I think we created something incredible and miraculous, and it deserves to be understood. And the fact that it's ugly history that also involves Refuge Recovery and Noah Levine is just something we live with, something that's natural and that is not appropriate to run away from. Although, you know, if you're just getting into the program, don't obsess about this stuff. This stuff isn't what's important. This video is for people who are kind of deep into it and just want to know the history. All right. Don't sue me. Please don't sue me. Hey, you know what's a big part of this history of Refuge Recovery and Recovery Dharma? Lawsuits. There's a big lawsuit at the heart of the split, and there's also a million little Schrodinger's lawsuits. Noah Levine, the original author of Refuge Recovery, who owns the copyright to the book, and that's been established in court, spoiler alert, had, at least he used to, had this lawyer who was working for free, and he had said he worked for hundreds of hours for Noah Levine for free, and he wrote a lot of legal letters to people telling them that he was going to sue them for the way that they were talking about Refuge Recovery, the way they used the name Refuge Recovery to describe their stuff, like especially if you used, you know, if you mix these up, don't mix these up, please. I do not want to mix these two up. They are legally distinct entities that just happen to have the exact same amazing ancient Buddhist wisdom in them. But yeah, so don't sue me. This is not a suable thing, you know. It's just my opinion. It's just my opinion for legal purposes and just for educational purposes to help people understand my experiences with this. All right. So, shall we dig in? Where does this come from? This comes from people in LA. Noah Levine and his friends were doing Buddhism together. They were a bunch of tattooed freaks doing Buddhism, being amazing. Noah had written other books. I won't dig in too much to it. I don't want to dig into dates and stuff because it's not about that. But they were hanging out doing Buddhism, and they said, hey, why are we doing 12-step meetings when we could be doing, and going to 12-step meetings and like translating every one of the steps into Buddhism when we could have a Buddhist program? So they just made one. They just invented one. They debugged it live. They did focus groups with people, started running Buddhist meetings. And then eventually they developed a script for the meetings. They had meditations ready, and Noah Levine had a book deal. He had to write another book. His publisher wanted him to write another book by Noah Levine. And they decided to make Refuge Recovery the next book. So it is an official book with an official publisher and everything. And the book was collaboratively written by a group of those friends in a lot of ways. A lot of them worked on it. Some of them wrote chapters. There's chapters at the back of the book that are like Joe's story, Jim's story, Sue's story. Those aren't the real names. You can read the book. But beyond that, they worked on all of the chapters together. It was a group effort, and that's written in the book. And I have the page, and I'll just read this section of the book for you because I think the evidence is right here in the book. You don't need to like go looking around. Although I am credited with writing this book, the large community at Refuge Recovery is the inspirational and creative force behind it. This community has helped shape, inform, and enhance the program with their direct experience of practicing these principles. This book, then, should be viewed as a collaborative effort, a book written for the plural rather than the singular, the we instead of the I, since it speaks for Buddhists and adjuncts everywhere. And it's true. I did an interview with one of the people who worked on this, Gary Sanders, and he talked about all the different ways that people were passing about around drafts that they worked on it together. So anyway, I consider that an established fact. At least Gary Sanders, who was there, said so, and I'll put a link, of course, in the description to that other video where I interviewed him I interviewed him in the midst of the drama before Recovery Dharma had been created, back when we were trying to keep Refuge Recovery. Because one thing I'll say is the period of that led to the creation of Recovery Dharma was a period where it was unclear who would control Refuge Recovery, whether it would be Noah, or if Noah would leave and other people would manage it, in the spirit of that quote I just read, right? And that quote really denies a lot of the important stuff that Noah did later, because he asserted that he owned it himself, that he was the sole copyright, which he was, and that's true. And I actually never disagreed with that. Um, Unfortunately, it was up to him to let go of it, because the publisher owned the copyright, and the people who worked with him accepted that at the time, that he would be the author, and that there you go. So that's what happened. Now, so they created meetings. They went for the book to go with the meetings, and they started selling them at meetings and encouraging everyone to buy a copy, of course, and buying big stacks and bringing them. And you could get a deal with the publisher to get a whole stack of them and bring it to a meeting and sell them for a discount. And it started to grow. It got really big. It was not, worldwide. You could say it's worldwide, but all over the US. It was in Canada. I'm Canadian, so it was in Montreal and Vancouver and Alberta and Ottawa, Toronto. Great. And that's sort of when I came in. So for what it's worth, I joined in at the very end of, at the beginning of 2018. I found it. I found recovery. This made such a difference. I did all the homework it told you to do in the book. I did my inventories and all that stuff. Okay. And and I'll say one more thing, which is that there is, I don't have a source for this one that I could find easily from one of the newspapers, but there was a long-term plan among the board of directors and Noah, who was on the board of directors of Refuge Recovery, which was both a copyrighted book and a nonprofit organization that sort of oversaw the meetings, the way you have a AA World Services, and the way you have now, we have in modern Recovery Dharma, there's something called Recovery Dharma Global, and there it's the board of directors, and they don't run the meetings, but they run the conference, and they sort of manage the brand and the books and the publishing and stuff. So that's sort of what the Refuge Recovery nonprofit was. And they had told Noah, and Noah had agreed with them, that he should step back, that he shouldn't be that owner character. He should be just a consultant, someone who works with the program and promotes it, but not someone who's dictator for life, let's say. That's a very unkind way to say it, but I think that was the spirit. And my understanding is that it was uncontroversial, except that it was a very slow process up until this point of Noah actually letting go of anything, which is understandable and not the end of the world. What was sort of a very big problem was the sex abuse scandal. So like trigger warning, if you go look at these articles. So the way a lot of us learned about it was from two articles that came out on Jezebel, which is sort of a blog. It's like a news website, but these are really well-researched articles. And if you can go read them yourself. And I just re-listened to them and I was like, they interviewed a lot of people and they reported what people told them. And it's some Me Too stuff from 2018. And it's, them too. Some stuff happened. I'm not going to dig into the details because I don't think the details of exactly what happened are important. But there's the first article that sort of talked about all the speculation and reported on the fact that there was an investigation being done of Noah by both the police and the different Buddhist communities he was a part of. And then the second one that had a copy of the investigation done by the Buddhist communities and reported on what was actually in that. And they both have really upsetting information, really lots of nasty stuff that makes you think, man, I don't want this person to be in charge of this program, maybe. But I won't dig into it, okay? But it happened. And guess what? People were upset. People didn't want Noah to be the ruler of Refuge Recovery. And that's relative, but what's undeniable is that he was asked to step away from teaching by his teachers and by his communities. The Refuge Recovery Board of Directors specifically asked him to step away while the whole investigation happened. His other communities did the investigation and told him to stop teaching. He didn't stop teaching, is my understanding. He kept doing different types of things. He kept organizing retreats the whole time. None of that is ideal. So he was removed from the board temporarily. And what happened was more and more the relationship between the board of directors of Refuge Recovery, the nonprofit, and I'll stop here to say there was this other thing, these treatment centers, right? Like a rehab that you go to and you pay for it with your insurance, called also Refuge Recovery Treatment Centers, but it's also called Refuge Recovery. So there was the book copyright, the for that was a for-profit business that ran those centers, and then the nonprofit that was theoretically running the meetings. Okay, so those centers tried to stay open, and he owned them, so no one could stop him from doing it, and he kept hosting meetings and things at the centers. So the board had an oppositional relationship with Noah at a certain point, and ultimately it resulted in a long, slow lawsuit where the board. I'm not a lawyer, and I am only describing this in the simplest terms I could think of. But the board claimed that they, without Noah, had a right to Refuge Recovery as a trademark, as a brand, as something to run the meetings, that the nature, like the details of the founding documents of that nonprofit involved Noah having given the rights to it. But they were also, I think, asking him to stop using it, which, that was a long, slow lawsuit that dragged out over the course of about a year. Personally, I know a little bit about copyright. I know just enough to get in trouble. I studied it I did communications at university, and that lawsuit never sang to my heart. Noah Levine is the author of the book, and his publisher helped him do the trademark. And I think it was always his. I think the question was, can we get him to step away? And the answer was no. He was unwilling to step away. It was his livelihood. It was his business in various ways, and he thought he had a right to it, and he wasn't going to stop being Refuge Recovery, because we really felt, if he would just step away, we could keep it, and we could say, look, the founder had problems, but he stepped away, so the program is still clean, and you can come and join us. And because it was like, look, if we could get rid of him, if we could get him to back off, not only would we be free of him, but we would have shown that we are thoughtful and careful and that we keep ourselves clean and safe, right? And instead, it turned out it was impossible. He was not going to let go. And so there had to be a lawsuit. And once again, he had lawyers working for him for free indefinitely. And so that lawsuit definitely lost. It's one of those lawsuits that, like, whoever blinks first, right? Whoever runs out of money for lawyers loses, because ultimately you can drag it out so long that it becomes just who can afford lawyers, right? And that's a whole legal thing that isn't really the point, other than we thought it might work. So there's a whole period. If you go look at my other video with Gary Sanders, where we talk about the creation of the book, I'm kind of trying to wrestle the book away from Noah, because I'm hoping we can keep it, because I love it. I love the brand. I love the logo. I love the book. We really wanted to keep doing Refuge Recovery. We did not want to build something new, even though it was good. We won. It's a very good thing that Recovery Dharma exists, that there's a Creative Commons book that anyone can copy and modify and do everything with. I love you. And I'm very proud of the work we did. And ultimately, we got free. And that's what happened. The lawsuit ended with an agreement between Refuge Recovery and between Noah Levine, who was going to start a new organization called Refuge Recovery World Services to replace the old Refuge Recovery nonprofit dissolved. And two new things were created. One, the Recovery Dharma Global nonprofit that manages this book and manages the new Recovery Dharma community, and two, the Refuge Recovery World Services, a brand new nonprofit with a whole new structure and a whole new set of founding documents that leave no ambiguity, that no one's in control, and that he owns it, and it's appropriate that he did that. Part of the way this happened was at this event called Refcon, which was the Refuge Recovery Conference that happened each year, and there was a whole session where Noah was on stage, and then Amy Reed, who was representing the sort of nascent Recovery Dharma, the board of directors perspective, and they each had a time to talk and discuss their positions in light of this sort of agreement, that there would be two new organizations. And there was a whole thing where actually, like, there was a mailing list, and it was really important because there was like thousands and thousands of people on the Refuge Recovery mailing list. And there was agreement that ultimately Noah Levine and the new Refuge Recovery would take over that mailing list. But that first, the old board of Refuge Recovery, the interim board, the one who were against Noah in the lawsuit, would have a moment to use the mailing list to send email about Refuge Recovery, about Recovery Dharma and the new program and how it would work, and to encourage people to switch, you know? And there was a whole community movement, right? And I played a part in this. I did this whole thing, and I posted it on my blog, and I'll put the link in the chat on the Facebook group for Refuge Recovery, which had, I forget, thousands and thousands of people. And my proposal was every local meeting, when it was looking like the lawsuit was going to end, and especially when it was looking like the lawsuit would end and Noah would win, and that the current board, who a lot of us supported that board, we were like, we want this to win. We want to keep Refuge Recovery. We want to have it clean. That we were not going to get what we wanted, that we were going to have to either accept Noah Levine taking it over or start something new. And I said every meeting should discuss this, and they should have a conversation before that happens to decide what they want to do if that happens, right? Because the meetings, and I'll talk for a sec about how it felt in the meetings at that time, because we were still doing Refuge Recovery meetings, and it was really unclear, like, what are we supporting? Are we supporting Noah, or are we supporting the current board of directors of the organization that theoretically oversees this meeting we're at? And it felt ugly. I am a truth teller. I don't like to hide from things. I didn't want people to come and ask, "Hey, did you hear about this? And why didn't you tell us?" Because I knew about it because I was the one on the Facebook groups and stuff. Whereas on the ground, most people didn't know. They didn't care about this. They didn't read Jezebel. You know, they just came to meetings for recovery, and they were trying to stay sober. And so you don't want to stress people out, but also, you know, you want to keep them informed so that they don't find out later and feel violated by the whole thing, right? So it was a dance, and a lot of places just ignored it, and either no one knew about it or the person who knew about it didn't tell people. I told people, and you know what? People stopped coming. A lot of people were like, "What?" And they look at the article and be like, "Oh, I don't want this. I'm going to go back to AA." You know, like I came here partially because AA is full of weirdness and scandals, and this place seems safe. And now this. And you know, like there was like these weird moments where there would be a new person there, a woman especially at the meeting, and I'd be like, "Hey, here's your new book. Like, hey, thank you. Give me $10. Here's your book." And I just want to let you know that this book was written by a group of people, not just one, but the author whose name, and you know, I sort of blacked. I blacked it out a little bit because I wanted to. Anyway, that's my thing. It says Noah Levine here, and it says it here. If you look up this guy, you're going to find some bad stuff. So just be careful. Like, and I really wanted to give a trigger warning, as weird as that is, and trigger warnings, I don't want to debate it. But just, I thought people deserve to know and not be surprised later. Cause a lot of people felt really violated when they learned about the scandal, that they had this sort of parasocial relationship with Noah. And I definitely felt that. Like, I felt violated to learn that he was a flawed hero, like they all are. But you know, especially when we learned about that stuff, it was like in the context of a lot of denial from Noah, and like he tried to take responsibility and apologize for causing harm. I don't want to say he never apologized, but that's not how I would have apologized, and that's not how the kind of apologies that I hope for from my mentors and celebrities and stuff. So it was hard at the meetings, and they were not growing. The meetings were a lot of, anyone who was letting people know about this was finding the meetings were not growing. And when I talked to people about it, often it would be the one thing they know about Refuge Recovery was the scandal with Noah. And that was a very, very bad thing. So we really needed to get away from it. We needed to resolve it. And I said, my thing at the time was, there's board is against him. Like, he is not supported by everyone, and I don't support him. And I promote everyone at this meeting not supporting him, and we are trying to get free of him. And so when the lawsuit was going to end, I said, let's agree that if he's going to take over, we'll do something else. I had heard that the board who was against Noah were going to do something new. And we didn't know what it was. We didn't know what it would be called. What's the name going to be? You know, Buddhism Recovery, like something, you know, how do we name it? What do we have? but we agreed to do it, and a lot of meetings agreed to do that. And then there was this big conference with the talk by Noah, and we heard both sides. And you can go watch this video. And if you're interested in this like moment, I think that video is a really good way to hear Noah's side of it and hear Amy's side of it. And Amy's speech is beautiful and really sets out why did we need recovery dharma. And the answer is in Amy's speech there, and it's about independence. It's about not being subject to leaders. It's about being democratic, and it is about having a program really focused on anti-oppressive politics and safety. And I'll say that was a theme of Refuge Recovery and Noah's Buddhist teachings overall, and all his different activities, was that this is for punks. This is for everyone. This is not just for middle-class white people. This is something that's down to earth and accessible. And they really made a deal about being feminist and being anti-racist. And the struggle was, when this scandal happened, Noah, it didn't feel like that to a lot of us. It didn't feel to many of us like it was upholding those values, whereas Recovery Dharma we could forge from the beginning with no owners, no leaders, just collaboration and Buddhism and taking care of each other and trying to make a safe space. And there was a book, and I'll talk about the book for a second because some people wrote it, and Amy was one of them, and Paul A., and there's a bunch of people who were working on it. I forget the other one. Anyway, it's not about credit, the book. It was a collaborative effort. There's no credit to anyone in the book itself. The only credit, the only copyright here is the Recovery Dharma message. The Creative Commons message, which is a little icon here that says that this is sort of free of copyright. I'm not going to try and explain all of Creative Commons, but it's open source, let's say. As a book, it's an open source book where anyone's allowed to make copies and modify it and do what they want, as long as what they create from it is also Creative Commons, open source, let's say. And so, for example, I can make my own version of the book with a different cover, with my annotations, with more chapters, whatever I want. And that means we are not subject to anything. It was written by a group who were actually working before, like they spent the year before the split working on the book, to kind of have, my understanding is there was like a literature committee in Refuge Recovery. Literature committee was working on like a Refuge Recovery 2.0 book that theoretically, if the board had won the lawsuit and they had the trademark to the name, they would not have had the trademark to the book, and they would have been eager to get rid of the book so that we would have no connection to Noah, right? We don't want to be giving Noah money if after this whole lawsuit and everything. So they were working on a new book that could have been called Refuge Recovery 2 or just Refuge Recovery Manual, or who knows, right? But in the end, they sort of just and then figured out the name, and the original name was Dharma of Recovery. And we got, at the conference, we all got printed out copies, and I don't have mine. It's not here, but I keep it. It's a valuable thing to me. And it like just like a printed out thing with like a little cheap binding from Kinko's or whatever. And it was beautiful, and we loved it. And it was a gift. And lots of people worked on it. I worked on it a little tiny bit. There's a couple of extra headings that I added. I didn't get a chance to edit the whole thing, but the first section I got a little bit of, I had early access to the Google Doc, and I did some edits, and they got integrated. So I felt happy about that. But more than anything, the important thing about this book, to compare them for a second, like I said I would do that. This one is more rough around the edges, and I love that about it, actually. I think it's very accessible to a broad audience. It really does address the punks and the freaks. It has a easier reading level. It takes some of the Buddhist thoughts and brings them and translates them in a way to simple language. The Recovery Dharma book is on the other hand, to praise it, it is more, it honors the Buddhist teachings more directly. It doesn't try to water it down. Like the Four Noble Truths are directly the Four Noble Truths, whereas Refuge Recovery gives you like the Four Noble Truths of recovery, and they're different, right? So Recovery Dharma sort of expects more from a reader. I think it has a higher reading level, but at the same time, it works, and it it's not inaccessible. It just asks you to push yourself a little further, to learn more Buddhist words, Pali words like karma and dharma and sangha and things like that. Another difference, the Refuge Recovery book has a set of, it calls them inventories, these long lists of questions that you fill out. And that's from AA. That's from 12-step programs, this concept of inventories where you write down everything bad you did, write down everything bad that happened to you because of your addiction. And I did it and it was extremely valuable. I loved it. But a lot of people say it's not trauma informed. Some people will struggle to get through it, and it may be triggering to answer all those questions in that way. And so one of the changes was at the end of each chapter of this book, instead you have these sections called questions for inquiry. And the questions for inquiry are sort of like, and you'll get them at the end of each chapter, and it sort of gives you homework. So each day, if you're using this book, and if you're new, hi, it's a great book and you should use it. You could read a chapter a day and then spend some time, but buy a beautiful journal and just answer those questions. But they're one, more open-ended, and two, it specifically tells you only do this as much as you're comfortable. Don't keep filling it out if it's stressing you out. If it makes you want to go back to your addiction to fill this out, then stop. And, plenty of people would tell you that about the Refuge Recovery ones, but it wasn't in the book. And also some people would tell you not to. They're like, no, it hurts because your addiction was horrible and you should feel bad to feel better, or I don't know, but like tough love, trauma informed. Both have lots of tough love. Both have lots of trauma informed. But if we're comparing them, that's the difference. And then down to earth, easy to read, light read, heavy handed, but more traditional Buddhism. So those are the differences. I love them both. And honestly, if you're struggling with addictions, it's still a great book. I have been through so much, and I'm smiling, and I'm glad I could make this video in a fun way. But this was a terrible, stressful time in my life. I'm proud of what we did, being one of the people who helped push this along. But this was very stressful, and I no longer think of Noah with anger. I try not to think of him. I'm making this video now that I don't think about him anymore on a regular basis. But it's very upsetting to think about Noah, and yet this book is excellent. Lots of people wrote it, not just Noah, and it's full of wisdom that it's not just Noah. If you need a book, you already read this one and you want another one, check it out. It's a great book that lots of people worked on, but buy a used copy so Noah doesn't get money. I'm sorry, I'm biased. I told you. But hey, if you're from Refuge Recovery and you're watching this and you just want to understand, then I hope it helps you understand. So, what else? Okay, I missed this one. There's another article that's really interesting. If you're going to read just one article, I'll put it at the top of the description. It's this LA Mag article that was written right around the time of Refcon. So it's the latest article that I'm going to link, and it's the most complete, and it summarizes the whole thing really well. So if you want to second guess what I'm saying, you can go. And they interviewed Noah. So this was Noah given a chance to say what he thought, and he really spells out some of his toxic behavior as far as I'm concerned. Like, he says some things that are definitely racist in here, and you can go read it and you can decide if you think he says anything racist in here. But the article is relatively neutral and uses his own words in a way that I think is very effective. So anyway, that covers this whole situation I was just talking about up to that point. We had meetings converting. So yeah, the Recovery Dharma comes out. It's given a name, Recovery Dharma. I was involved in choosing that name. The domain name was available. We all wanted it to be Dharma Recovery, but dharmarecovery.org wasn't available, and recoverydharma.org was available. It all sounded like terrible in our mouths when we said it, but we got used to it, and now no one ever mentions it, that it sounds weird that recovery comes first. Yeah, we got the domain name, we got a website, and people started converting. And I think there was about 500 Refuge Recovery meetings, and we ended up with like 350 official Recovery Dharma meetings. And a lot of those meetings that were still Refuge Recovery were places where they had never discussed it. So that's interesting, isn't it? I think that might be it. We're getting towards the end here. What's happening now? They both still exist. You can go to both websites. You can go to them both meetings. I have people coming to my Recovery Dharma meetings and they're like, oh, I went to my local meeting and it was Refuge Recovery. Is this the same? And maybe I'll share this video with them. But the answer is yes, please stay. It's great. Recovery Dharma is huge. Refuge Recovery has grown. It has grown back. You know, I don't think it has 500 meetings. I didn't go check. I don't want to go spend time on their website. But Recovery Dharma is definitely growing in the pandemic. The amount of online meetings, I host online meetings personally. I live in Mexico and there's no in-person meetings here. So I host online ones and we got into the hundreds. They are every day. They are all day, every day online, wherever you are. There's a meeting probably happening right now of Recovery Dharma. There are queer meetings almost every day. There's women's meetings almost every day. There's codependency specific meetings. You know, Recovery Dharma is about they're both about all types of addiction, but there's affinity meetings in Recovery Dharma for things like sex addiction, codependency. There's one for friends and family, I think. And it's all just Buddhism. So it all just works. The worst thing I think about this whole situation is the confusion and the messiness and how hard it is to find information, which is why I made this video. So please share this video with people if they have questions and you don't mind my strong Recovery Dharma bias. And you know, what's important here isn't whether Noah's a good person. It's not whether Recovery Dharma's Creative Commons license is important. The important thing is that we all find recovery, and whether it's in AA and 12-step programs or Refuge Recovery or Recovery Dharma, we just need to let go of the behaviors that we know are harming us and find peace with the world so that we can do that and stop running away from the things we're afraid of and start running towards the behavior that is good for us, that takes care of us, that takes care of each other. We need to find ways to be of service to each other because that's how we stay happy. That's how we stay sober. And I love Recovery Dharma, and it's given me all of those chances to be of service, to communicate with people, to learn from the people. I just hit 5 years. Congratulations to me. Thank you. 5 years, no weed or alcohol. And yet I need these meetings for sure because there's lots of other things in my life on the computer, things that distract me, things that aren't good for me. We call it process addictions. Anyway, here's my little wholesome rant at the end. Find your recovery wherever you can find it and understand the history if that helps. May we all feel safe and loved, regardless of where we find solace. May we be free from the suffering that we impose on ourselves and from the suffering that we let others inflict on us. May we be happy. May we celebrate our success and the success of others. And may we live at ease and find acceptance for all things as they are, for other people and their messiness, for ourselves and our messiness. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I'm Jer. I love you. Bye-bye.